I'd like to tell you about the mission field. I served a mission in Scotland from September 1963 to September 1965. And we went into the mission home in Salt Lake City, Utah, which was where the conference center is today. I had 11 companions in Scotland, but I had a companion in the mission home who was super. His name was Richard Johnson. He was from Bountiful, Utah, a very handsome guy. And I don't remember the situation with his parents, but for some reason he lived with his grandparents. At least he did in the summertime. And his grandfather was a churchy guy, and so he took Richard down to the Salt Lake Temple where he received his endowment, his temple endowment, probably in June. When we were in the mission home, we would walk every day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner down to the Joseph Smith Memorial Building that at that time was called Hotel Utah. And we'd walk by the Salt Lake Temple knowing that on Thursday we were going to go to the temple ourselves and receive our own endowment. And so every day I'd ask him questions about the temple and what's inside and what it looked like. But he'd always say, "My lips are sealed. You're not supposed to talk about things in the temple outside of the temple." And I think that was the first thing I learned about the temple, is how sacred, not necessarily secret, but how sacred temple ordinances really are. In Scotland, my first companion was a guy by the name of Elder Colin Tanner, who I think was one of the all-time great missionaries. Hard worker. I remember the first morning at 5:30 in the morning, I could hear the bed squeaking. His bed was over on the other side of the room. I was on this side. And from 5:30 to 6 o'clock every morning, he would do sit-ups. I thought, oh my goodness, this is going to be the longest 2 years in the history of the world. Elder Tanner was from Granite High School. He played football for the University of Utah and was just a great companion. The only sad thing for me is I've never seen him since. I think I've maybe seen him one time in the mission field after my experience with him, and I've never seen him since. My second companion was a guy named Win Hibbard. Win was a funny guy. He was about 5'6" and 280 pounds, or about 200 and maybe 25 pounds. Kind of round, had no personality whatsoever, and no people skills. He was from Ashton, Idaho, and died in a rest home when he was 58 years old. And Win never married. My next companion was Elder Kay Christensen from Delta, Utah. His older brother, 2 years older, was my friend, Ken Christensen, and his dad was our bishop when we were kids. And I found out today, what's the date today, Peyton?
I don't know, the 4th?
No, it's not the 4th.
It's the 7th.
But today I found out the 7th of September, 2021, that Kay had died, and his funeral was yesterday. If I'd have known that, I would have headed to Delta and supported him. Kay was a colorful guy. He was a good guy. He invented or started Intermountain West Insulation, which me and several other Scottish missionaries got involved with. And although Kay had trouble in his marriages, he was married 4 different times, I still consider him, he was a good guy, and I consider him one of my best friends. My next companion was Elder Paul Pace from Arizona. He was very bright, memorized the discussions quickly, and then from that time on, studied airplanes. In our study time, I'd be trying to learn the lesson plan, and he'd be studying airplanes. All he wanted to do was be an airline pilot. This was Vietnam time, and when he got out of the military, he was killed in Vietnam in an airplane shoot down. And I believe he was 24 years old. My next companion was a person named Howard Ferner from Highland High School in Salt Lake City. Howard was a good guy, but he was kind of difficult to work with because he wouldn't talk to you. I'm a talker. I need to be talked to every day. I need to talk to people. And we could go all day long and he would hardly say a word to me. So I found him frustrating to work with, although he was a good guy. And I heard recently, or maybe 2 years ago, that he had the beginnings of Alzheimer's. So he might have passed away by now as well. I'm not sure. Elder Paul Peterson was my next companion from Brigham City, Utah, and really, he was one of the really great missionaries. He spit shined his shoes every night. He was very clean. He wrote in his journal every day, and he and I decided we were going to get rich by, his father owned a Beeline service station, which I don't think they even make anymore. But we decided we were going to make a commercial and help his dad sell some gas and make some money. So we made up this song and went like this: Beeline gas, put it in your tank and you'll be full of pass. Nothing could be finer than to live in Carolina unless you're using Beeline too. Kind of goofy, but needless to say, we never made any money on it. Paul has been a banker all of his life, and he's just really a great guy. He was an Elders Quorum president for about 10 years, and when they released him, he said he bawled his eyes out. It was the best church calling he ever had in his life. My next companion was Elder Alan Bowles, who lived in Tacoma, Washington, or lived in Federal Way, just the town next to Tacoma. And as life would have it, when I was called to be a stake president, he was called to be a stake president in the neighboring state to mine on the very same day. He was called by Howard W. Hunter, and I was called by Elder L. Tom Perry, both men members of the Quorum of 12 Apostles. My next companion is Elder Steve McMurray, who is really one of the brightest guys I've ever met and a hard worker. Had flaming red hair. He lives in Bountiful, Utah. I still keep in touch with him. And he was another one of the great missionaries in Scotland. Steve has been an attorney all his life, and he has written a book, which is not in hardback yet, but you can find it on, on Kindle, which I have not done yet, but I need to do that. Steve McMurray, one of the great people. My next companion was Elder John Cunningham, who I actually talked to today. He lives in Petaluma, California. John went from 200 pounds to 140 pounds. He had some stomach problems like I've had. He did not have a stomach removed, but had it partially removed. And this was 10 years ago, but he told me today that he has leveled out at about 140 pounds. One of the great missionaries, a good hard worker. My next companion was Elder Keith Nelson from Hiram, Utah. And again, Keith, he had just been out on his mission not too long. Most missionaries receive letters from their parents or from their mother every week, but Keith would receive letters from his father every week. And his father must have been the neatest guy in the world. Every time he'd get a letter, it would always start out by saying, "Dear Keith, my son, my son." And he'd say, I was reading in Alma the other day, Alma 32, I found this real cool verse in, Alma 32 talking about faith. And so every week he would write Keith a letter. It would not be more than one page, and it'd always be a doctrinal conversation. My last companion was a kid named Kent Orton, who, if I remember correctly, was from Ogden, Utah. He'd been serving in the North Scottish Mission, came down with yellow jaundice, spent 6 weeks in the hospital. Then they combined the mission, so they sent him down to me. And truthfully, he should never have been on a mission. He didn't study. He wouldn't study. And he played football for Weber State, so he just thought he was cool. He was kind of a nice-looking guy, but he was the epitome of being lazy. And finally, I got him. He'd been out a year, and we worked every day to do the discussions. Finally, he could pass the first discussion. Been on his mission a year. Finally, he passed the first discussion. I said, "Today, you're going to teach the first discussion." He said, "Okay, I will. And we'd do that. But every time I tried to get him to teach the first discussion, we'd get in the people's homes, and I'd say, "Okay," I'd do the chit chat with the family, and then I'd say, "We have a discussion for you, and Elder Orton will teach that to you." And Elder Orton would say, "Well, I was sitting here, and I just kind of felt impressed that maybe Elder Sampson ought to teach it." And then he'd turn the time over to me. Well, what was I going to do? Get in a fight or something? So I'd have to teach the first discussion to these people. But those were my 11 companions, and 12th if you count Richard Johnson in the mission home. I love every one of them, and I love a few of them more than I love others. But if I could see them today, I'd throw my arms around them and just give them a big hug and thank them. So out of those 12 companions, 4 have passed away. Elder Hibbert, Elder Bowles, Elder Christensen, and Elder Bates. I can honestly tell you that Carolyn and I have never had an argument. Now, I've hurt her feelings a few times, but it's always been one-sided on my part. I'm the dumbbell in the bunch. In the mission field, it was kind of fun, and I'm going back when I was a kid in Scotland, on occasion to get in an old-fashioned Bible bash and just prove to your opponent just how well-versed you were in the scriptures, especially if you were dealing with a Jehovah's Witness. However, a few of the rules for an argument to be successful are, and I've got 5 or 6 things here that you need to be aware of. Number 1, don't raise your voice. Improve your argument. Number 2, the volume of your voice does not increase the validity of your argument. Number 3, to settle an argument, think of what is right, not who is right. Married couples need to understand a woman has the last word in any argument. Anything a man says after that is the beginning of a new argument. A good friend told me that the key to a successful marriage was to argue naked. The purpose of an argument should not be victory but progress. And then lastly, never argue with an idiot. They drag you down to their level and then beat you with the experience. Thank you. When Carolyn was in the 10th grade, her dad moved the family to St. George, and Carolyn went kicking and screaming all the way. She was not happy with the move. She didn't know anybody. She was tired of going from school to school. But when she got to St. George, she found out some of the kids there were absolutely fabulous. One story that I think is interesting, they got there, and Neil and Max, Grandpa tried to get them on a baseball team. Well, baseball had started, all the kids were on teams, and the coaches didn't really want them. And Grandpa Dastrup said, wait a minute, let me bring my boys over here and just show you what they can do. So first of all, they put Max up there and let him throw the ball pitching. Max could throw the ball about 90 miles an hour, and Neil wasn't a bad infielder. So what they did, they immediately put them on the team, and those two boys made their presence felt. Well, Carolyn was the new girl in town, but she was cute. And so one day a knock came to the door. I've forgotten the name of the kid. Actually, I think it was an Esplin kid. And said, how would you like to go to Hurricane with us today? We're culling peaches. Well, Carolyn didn't know what culling peaches meant, but hey, you get out of the house, you get to meet some new people. So they picked her up. They said, we'll pick you up tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock in the morning. So they came over in their pickup, picked her up, two guys, and they put her in the middle. They drove over to Hurricane. And on the way, Phil said, do you mind if I smoke? And Carolyn said, yes, I mind if you smoke. I don't want you to smoke. And so when they arrived in Hurricane, he got out of the pickup and talking to some of the other guys said, hey, we have an angel here. She thinks she's a goody two-shoes. She thinks she's an angel. And so from that point forward, her nickname was Angel. When I showed up in St. George a few years later, 1965, so that would have been 4 years later, she still had that tag as Angel. And I'm glad she was more impressed with returned missionaries than with guys that smoked.